Hey Arseny, let's look at your new set of essays today. Okay, problems with pollution. Let's see what you wrote. Okay, this is a reasons and solution essay, so let's see what you said. Due to high levels of economic and technological development, the 21st century became an era of comfort and prosperity. Thus, these benefits are followed by various problems, including the ecological ones. Get rid of the here. For example, pollution in urbanized territories is gaining more and more traction nowadays. This essay will give an overview of the main reasons for these problems and some possible ways to solve them. Okay, that's good. Let's move on. Certainly, increased pollution has numerous reasons. I don't really like that sentence. It's a little awkward. Pollution has numerous reasons. Just phrase it differently. Certainly, there are a variety of reasons why pollution is on the increase. It makes more sense. Certainly, the reasons for increased pollution can be found in a variety of causes or something along those lines. But this syntax here just feels really rather strange to me. Okay? All right. But yeah, just there are numerous reasons for the increase in pollution is probably the easiest way to say this. Firstly, it can be caused by rising industrial activity, which is growing in order to produce more and more goods every day. People now tend to buy more stuff, avoid the word stuff, which means more stuff is manufactured. Stuff is a really generic word and it's also rather informal. So definitely avoid it in this context, okay? Okay, so you could have said items, you could have said products. Any one of those words would have been better. Okay. Considering the fact that the production process of most goods, get rid of the, includes the use of chemicals and hydrocarbons, greater amounts of these potentially dangerous for the ecosystem materials are used, which leads to increased pollution. Secondly, a relatively high level of income made it possible for most families to purchase a private transport vehicle. This leads not only to the higher production and therefore contamination levels, but also to greater gas emissions. Gas emissions. This is acting like an adjective, so it needs to be singular. Gas emissions from the use of cars. All right, that's pretty clear. So far, very good. Let's move on. Surely there is no one single solution that would solve the rising pollution issue. Although, all right, careful with although. You can't put a comma right after it. The comma has to come at the end of the clause. So let me show you what I mean. Okay, the other problem with this is that you can't use although like however. That's what you've done here. However can be used with just one side of a sentence, but although needs to connect two opposing sides. Okay, so what you needed to do here if you wanted to use although was connect these two sentences together. Otherwise, you should have used however. So let's try it like that. However, some actions can be taken to limit the volumes of everyday pollution. The volume, singular. For example, increased production is mainly caused by risen customer demand. I don't like risen. Rising makes sense. All right, and then you can't start which. So this should be this means if the ideas of reasonable consumption become more popular, people will buy less, which will lower the manufacturing volumes, which will cause smaller amounts of pollution. Okay. Maybe you could have talked about, what do you mean here by reasonable consumption? I think this is a word that probably needs some sort of definition, some sort of explanation, so that your reader understands what it is you're talking about entirely, okay? So, okay, high emissions from the use of private cars can be decreased with the development of the public transport network, or, for instance, with greater taxes for the ownership of private cars. Okay, I think you could have said one more sentence here. This will make people think twice about purchasing a car, or people will prefer to use public transport, which has lower emissions, and so forth and so forth. So just an extra sentence, just really develop it. Don't have just one idea with one sentence and that's it. All right, so moving on. To sum up, the reasons for high levels of pollution, especially in vast metropolitan areas, are many, and what's going on here? And got the origin of different nature. That's awkward. It needs to be rephrased, which determines the diversity of ways to solve them. Okay, and have origins of a different nature. Would have made more sense here. So it's a nice essay. You've got a lot of ideas. I thought you did pretty well. I liked a lot of your vocabulary, but some of your grammar was a little off, and so that's the area I want you to work with here on this set. But like I said, on the whole, I thought you did a nice job. So let's take a look at your task 1. Okay, so let's see what you did with your bar chart here. On the bar chart, should be in the bar chart. In the bar chart, volume of car sales in thousands in 9 European countries in 2018 is presented. Okay, overall, we can see that in most countries, total car sales were around 200 to 3,000 vehicles. Well, that's not really an overview. I mean, it kind of is, but I would have preferred something else. I would have preferred something like overall Hungary had the highest car sales, and BMW was the most popular among the 3 cars. Like something like that would have been an appropriate overview. But here you've got some data, and it's kind of, I don't know, it doesn't really give me a huge idea of the trend. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so most of the cars were sold in Hungary. Well, that's not what you mean. You mean the most cars were sold in Hungary. Because when you say most of the cars were sold in Hungary, that means like 400,000 were sold in Hungary, and then the remaining countries had like 50,000, 20,000, 30,000. So that's what you're saying means. So the right way to say this is the most cars were sold in Hungary. Nearly 400,000 with similar sales values for each of the 3 car manufacturers. You're missing a syllable there. Around 130 pieces each. Okay. In France, careful with your syntax here. 25% fewer cars were sold, with 300,000 cars in total. Around 120,000 BMWs were sold in France, which makes it nearly the same as the amount of BMWs sold in Hungary. Okay, careful with your grammar. In 3rd, 4th, and 5th place were Germany, Ireland, and Holland, with nearly the same number of cars sold, 250,000. Despite the similar amount of car sales, the brand distribution is different in these countries. BMWs were the most popular cars in Germany and Ireland, and Ford was in Holland. Although in Germany, careful, the volumes of Ford sold were really low, less than 5%. Again, you did this with although. I want you to remember that although connects to opposing sides of a sentence. You can't just use it, like if you want to use it like this, you have to use however. Okay. Now I lost where I was. Here we go. Around 200,000 cars, without of, were sold in Poland and UK, which is nearly twice less. Oh, no, you mean half, which is nearly half compared to Hungary. While in Poland, the number of sold cars of each brand was similar to the UK, Fords and Audis were the most and least sold respectively. Italy and Belgium were 2 countries with the least number of vehicles sold. Around 120,000 cars were sold in Italy, which is nearly the same as the number of BMWs sold in Hungary. BMW was the best-selling car brand in Italy, with nearly 90% of all sales there. The same brand distribution pattern we can see. No. We can see the same brand distribution pattern in Belgium. Nearly 90% of cars sold there in 2018, not 2017, were Fords. Okay, so you made this rather challenging for yourself. You decided to talk about both the country totals and the cars, the car companies, in one paragraph, and that's really rather tricky to do. If it were up to me, I would have suggested a much cleaner, much simpler way of doing this. So, for example, what I would have done if I were you is I would have talked about the totals, okay, in one paragraph. So I would talk about Hungary, I would talk about the second highest, which I think was France, and then I would talk about the lowest, and then I would probably talk about the ones that are in the middle. I would just kind of group them together. Then I would spend my next paragraph talking about the car companies themselves. So I would talk about, BMW being around 100,000 cars in every single country except for one. I would say what that is. I would figure out what that number is for Ford, say that Ford, sold this many. Like, use the numbers that are along the side. So like the 50,000, the 100,000 mark, use those numbers and say, you know, Ford sold over 100,000 cars in ABC country. It sold less than 50,000 in CDF or whatever, and then the remaining countries that sold between 50 and 100. So I would make groupings like that. All right, and it's a lot easier and a lot cleaner way, and the person reading it can kind of envision what you're talking about here. So this for me had a lot of grammatical and syntax mistakes. It didn't create incoherence. I mean, I always knew what you were talking about, so that's good, but it's probably not in one of those higher categories that you're aiming for. So I want you to really work on some of the expression here and some of the grammar. But for me, apart from grammar, the issue was with the way you organize this. It started off okay, but then it really just got kind of hard to follow, especially when you have it just in one big mash of like one paragraph here. So that's another suggestion. Separate it to also clarify. It helps, believe me, and have, you know, I think it's an easier way to do it. Talk about the totals and the countries here, and then spend a paragraph talking about the car companies themselves, okay? Doing it like the way I said, because it's a lot of information, right? It's like 36 pieces of information that you have to deal with. So you can't talk about everything, but you can group together so that you're at least giving an appropriate image of what's happening here. All right? Let me know if you have any questions about this, and I'll be waiting for another set from you. So good luck.